I am here with the Pace 4, which is a mid-weight city cruiser e-bike that got many of the same upgrades as other newer Aventon models, like the Level 3 commuter. It features the ACU Smart Module with 4G connectivity and a ton of high-tech security features, along with a few other upgrades and changes. So is this the best version of the Pace we've seen yet? Let's take a ride and find out. Welcome to Electric Bike Report, where we're known for in-depth, real-world testing and detailed e-bike reviews. I'm John, and I'll be taking you through the Pace 4 in this video. Do us a favor real quick before we jump in and make sure you're subscribed to the channel. If you haven't seen it already, we have a cool weekly news and entertainment show that I definitely recommend checking out. And then if this or any of our reviews helps you with your buying decision, please consider using the affiliate link in the video description when you make your purchase to help support our work. But let's proceed with the Pace and talk about some of its biggest highlights. I mentioned that this bike shares lots of features with other newer Aventon models, but I want to start off with something that separates it from those other bikes. Now, previous versions of the Pace had a very upright riding position, while this one feels a bit sportier and more stretched out. It doesn't have as much of an aggressive forward lean as the Level, but it falls somewhere between that bike and the Pace 500.3. This version of the bike no longer has cruiser-style handlebars, but it did keep a very comfortable cruiser-style saddle, which is mounted to a new suspension seat post with 50 millimeters of travel, so it still puts a really big focus on comfort. Another standout feature is the pedal assist system, which pairs a 500-watt rear hub motor with an ultra-responsive torque sensor. We'll talk more about this later on, but the bike has 3 assist settings with power levels that range from natural to super peppy, and I think it's very cool that you can personalize how the bike feels by adjusting its motor output through the Aventon app. Finally, there's the ACU Smart Module I mentioned in the intro, which is mounted behind the seat post in the bike's rear triangle, and this device gives you a bonkers amount of control over the bike's security. For starters, the bike's battery stays locked in the down tube until you eject it, and there's an electronic lock for the rear wheel to keep someone from riding off with the bike, plus you can set a passcode for the display. But on top of that, once you pair your bike with the Aventon app, you can activate a motion detection and alarm system, you can set up geofencing boundaries to make sure the bike stays where you want it, and in the event of theft, you can use the bike's 4G connectivity to track its location or remotely deactivate it to make it easier to recover. I'll show you all of those features in a walkthrough of the app later, but let's do a quick run through of the specs and components. Starting off with the step-through aluminum frame, the front triangle of the bike is cast in a single piece, so it's mostly smooth and there are only a couple of weld points. There's also a rigid aluminum fork. The Pace's battery is the same universal power supply that's used on all of Aventon's bikes with the ACU module. It's a 36-volt battery with 733 watt-hours of capacity that's made with LG cells, and it's UL 2271 certified. The bike has an 8-speed Shimano Altus drivetrain with a 48-tooth chainring and a 12 to 32-tooth cassette. The brake system is the 2-piston Tektro HD T3020 hydraulic disc system with 180mm front and rear rotors, and then there's a set of 27.5 by 2.1-inch street tires from Innova. There's an integrated light system with an LED headlight up front and tail lights and turn signals built into the seat stays. Back to the cockpit, those BMX-style handlebars I mentioned are 720mm wide, and they have lock-on ergonomic rubber grips. The bike's small combination control panel and display sits on the left handlebar next to the throttle lever, and the drivetrain is operated by a trigger-style shifter on the right handlebar. I have a few final details to wrap things up. The Pace 4 is a Class 2 e-bike with throttle and pedal assist up to 20 miles per hour, but its pedal-assisted speed can be increased up to 28 miles per hour through the Aventon app. Our test bike weighed about 61.5 pounds, including an 8.5 pound battery. It has a total payload capacity of up to 300 pounds. The early marketing materials we had didn't clarify if the bike itself is UL 2849 certified, though most of Aventon's newest models have been. We recommend checking the website using the link in the video description for updated information and pricing. And finally, the bike has 2 frame sizes and 3 color options. Ours is called blue steel, but there's also a silver or gray color called mica and a black or charcoal paint job called flint. All right, let's move on to our performance test so we can see how the Pace 4 stacks up. Leading off with our brake test, we tested the Pace 4 stopping power by pedaling up to 20 miles per hour, applying the brakes, and then measuring the distance it took for our test rider Griffin to come to a complete stop. The average from 3 of these tests was 20 feet 8 inches, which is over 1.5 feet better than average when compared to similar commuters and city cruisers we've tested. Now, there's no obvious reason why this bike did so well, as its weight, tire size, and tread pattern are all around what we'd expect for this style of bike. It's possible that the brake system itself is a contributing factor, but it's hard to say for sure since we haven't seen the Tektro T3020 system on many other e-bikes we've tested. Clearly, this system performed great, and just anecdotally, I'd say it felt better than average. It applied braking force intuitively and modulated speed well, but I do have to admit that I was a bit disappointed by one aspect of the bike here. The Pace 4 has tail lights, but not brake lights, and that largely comes down to the fact that the brake system does not have a motor cutoff feature. Overall, I don't think a motor cutoff is needed on bikes with torque sensors, and I'm happy Aventon included turn signals here, but I do think brake lights would make the bike safer overall. Otherwise, I was really happy with this setup and the bike's score in this test, so we give it 2 thumbs up overall. To test the Pace 4's pedal assist system and throttle, I took it out for a speed test on our local network of paved shared use paths. I pedaled the bike in Class 2 and Class 3 modes while taking note of my average speeds, and I also tested the throttle to see how quickly it could get up to the maximum of 20 miles per hour. Let's go see what happened. I'll talk about how the bike felt along the way, and then we can analyze the results once we get back here. All right, we are here for a speed test on the Pace 4. So we'll start off in Class 2 mode here with a top speed of 20 miles per hour. And I'm riding with no pedal assist here. The bike's pedaling pretty comfortably. It's, relatively light, so that makes sense. We're going, I'm gonna say, kind of between 11 and 11.5 miles per hour on average with no pedal assist, but let's go ahead and go up to eco mode and see what happens there. So, okay, slight little boost from the motor. Well, actually, it's making a pretty big difference, so I'm gonna take that back and say it's pretty impactful actually. So we're up to kind of between 14.5 and 15 miles per hour. Trying to maintain, a similar level of effort here, but it feels pretty natural. Obviously I'm going quite a bit faster, about 3 miles per hour or so, something like that. All right, let's go up to sport mode. Okay, definitely happier in this setting. Picking up pretty swiftly here, actually. So we'll have to get around these folks. All right. Coming up on your left. Thank you. Up to, let's see, kind of around 18.5 miles per hour or so. Again, kind of trying to maintain that similar level of effort. We'll get a final reading after we get around this bend. There's a slight downward grade here that is bumping us up, but all right, let's say right around 19 miles per hour in sport. Well, between 18.5 and 19. Okay, yeah, moving on to turbo mode. Definitely ultra powerful here. I mean, it does still feel pretty natural, but I'm just getting, a lot more return for the amount of effort that I'm putting in. And we are breaking the 20 mile per hour limit just a hair with my pedaling added in, which looks good. Okay, we'll call that test there. Let's see what happens in the Class 3 mode. All right, we are back for a Class 3 speed test here on the Pace 4. So starting off in eco mode this time, we are, let's see, I think right around the same area that we started in the Class 2 test. So between 14.5 miles per hour in the lowest pedal assist setting here in eco. So let's go ahead and go up to sport mode and see where that takes us. Again, just, a lot peppier here than in eco. Eco's super natural, so, if you
want the feel of an analog bike, I'd say go with that mode, but you know, sport definitely quite a bit more speed and power here. Let's see, we are, again, I think fairly similar, around 19 miles per hour here in sport mode, trying to maintain that consistent level of effort. Okay, let's go up to turbo mode. So there's gonna be more room for the bike to breathe in this setting. You're not gonna be limited by that cap on your left. We'll get around this bend here. All right. Like, as you can see, picking up pretty swiftly here, shifting up to 7th. And I think let's go up to 8th. So I'm not really putting a whole lot of effort on the pedals. I'm not working very hard, but you know, we're up to around 26 miles per hour, you know, keeping my level of effort pretty steady. But then if I put in just a little bit more, I mean, we are definitely cruising up to that class 3 limit and exceeding that just by a hair, 28.3 or so. Okay, yeah, that looks good. Let's call the pedal test there and let's check out the throttle. All right, and the last thing that we're gonna do here is check out the throttle's acceleration. We'll see how quickly it takes to go from 0 to 20. Wait for this to zero out here. Okay, so let's start in 3, 2, 1, go. All right, nice gradual start, and then picking up steadily up to 16, 18, and 20. All right, I'll see you back at the studio.
All right, let's recap the results from the pedal tests quickly. I started off with no pedal assist at an average speed of 11.4 miles per hour, and then in the class 2 test, I went 14.9 miles per hour on average in eco mode, 18.7 in sport mode, and 20.2 miles per hour in turbo. Things started off essentially the same in the class 3 test at 14.6 miles per hour in eco, then 19 miles per hour in sport, and finally 28.3 miles per hour in turbo with slightly harder and faster pedaling. Looking at the graphs of this data, we can see that the only real difference between the tests was the higher speed cap in the class 3 test. I found that eco mode kept the power level pretty light for a super natural feel. The highest power level in turbo mode made pedaling extremely easy, and the mid-level setting of sport mode felt like it skewed a bit more toward turbo than eco, which is reflected in my data from this test. I do want to point out a couple of caveats here. So first, we tested the bike with its default settings, but as I hinted at earlier, you can customize the bike's motor output using the Ride Tune feature in the Aventon app. We'll take a closer look at this in the app walkthrough later, but just be aware that my results would have likely been different if I'd changed the torque, assist, or sensitivity parameters that show up in the app there. And also, since this bike has a torque sensor and you and I likely pedal a bit differently, your results will probably be a little different from mine. Overall, I think eco is very appropriate for conserving power and getting a light workout. Sport mode seemed best for general riding, and turbo felt best for climbing hills more easily or reaching those class 3 speeds. Moving on to the throttle test though, I liked the pace had steady acceleration and that it felt really controlled without being too sluggish. I think the throttle's programming fits the theme and feel of the bike, so again, I'll give it a very solid 2 thumbs up for this test. We do 2 range tests to see how far every bike can go on a single charge of its battery. In the Pace 4's case, we did 1 test in turbo mode to get its minimum range and a second in eco mode for its maximum range. In both tests, we rode the bike until around 5% of the battery charge was left, as that's where it stopped offering meaningful pedal assist. The pace was well above average for the commuter category in both tests. We got 44.8 miles in turbo mode, which is 14.5 miles more than average when compared with similar bikes with 500 watt motors. And then in the eco mode test, we got a whopping 72.2 miles, which is about 16.5 miles more than average. The main difference between this bike and others is battery capacity. The ones we used for comparison had batteries with an average of 640 watt hours, so the Pace had an additional 80 watt hours in the tank. Its torque sensor also likely helped a lot since it allows the motor output to vary, which is naturally more efficient than the steady flow put out by bikes that use cadence sensors. Now, if you're able to stick with eco or sport modes, you'll get more miles out of the bike than you will in turbo, but even in that high power setting, we expect most folks would be able to get quite a few rides in before needing to recharge when using the Pace for leisure purposes. If you're commuting on this bike, you might need to recharge more often, but we'd expect at least a couple of round trips. And when you do need to plug in, Aventon included a 4-amp fast charger that should have you ready to roll again in about 5 hours. Our hill test for the Pace 4 is gonna be a bit different than usual. Our test rider Justin usually does our testing at a place called Hellhole Trail, but he was out of town and we were under a bit of a time crunch for this review, so I took the bike to our secondary location called Pilot Hill. I did the same standard practice of testing the bike with both its throttle and pedal assist system set to turbo mode, and I took a GoPro with me to show you how it went. So let's go see what happened and we can go over the results back here in the studio.
All right, I'm here at our secondary location called Pilot Hill with the Pace 4, and sorry in advance for traffic noise. I'm going to be doing this test a little bit differently here since Justin is out of town, and we'll talk about things back in the studio. But let me start up Strava here so I get my time in place. But let's go ahead and start off with throttle here. We'll go ahead and go in 3, 2, 1, go. All right, so the segment for the route starts kind of right here, so we get a little bit of a lead in, and then we'll see, how the motor does here. So far so good. Feels nice and steady. Definitely doesn't feel like it's struggling at all. It's not super powerful, but it definitely doesn't feel underpowered. It's kind of right in the middle of this nice kind of happy middle ground, if I can talk clearly. So this is where the hill starts getting fairly intense. And we are slowing down a little bit here, but still doing really well. I mean, we're holding above 12 miles per hour pretty consistently, maybe dipping down just a little below. But yeah, going strong. I don't think you're gonna be able to hear the motor a whole lot here. There's a little bit of a hum coming from it, but it's definitely not loud. It doesn't seem obtrusive to me. All right, we're starting to level off, so we're definitely picking up again in speed. All right, I'm sure you can hear the motor there. Yeah, definitely cruising very comfortably. Feels great. I think the bike did a great job. We'll see how it compares once we get back to the studio, but first let's stop, turn around, and do a pedal test. All right, we are back for the pedal test at Pilot Hill. Go ahead and start up Strava here, and we're in turbo mode. Let's go ahead and take off. All right. So as we talked about a little bit, turbo mode gives you a really nice amount of power. It does still feel natural, and responsive, but we're getting a lot of bang for the buck in terms of speed for the amount of effort that I'm putting in. I am not expecting to be breathing too heavily by the time we get to the top of the hill here. Just maintaining pretty high speed, around 16 miles per hour here. And again, there's a little bit of a hum from the motor that I doubt you can hear with all the traffic. A little bit of a quiet section there. I'd say this thing is climbing confidently. Shifting up. Yeah, feels really good. Again, let's go ahead and head back to the studio and we'll see how it compares.
As you could see, the bike had no trouble handling Pilot Hill in both tests. Now, that location isn't quite as extreme as Hellhole, but it is still fairly intimidating, and most cyclists that I've seen on analog bikes tend to get off and walk their bike to the top. For comparison purposes, we can take my times and speeds at Pilot Hill and find a bike with similar numbers to estimate how it might do at Hellhole Trail. On throttle, I finished my test with the Pace in 1 minute and 18 seconds with an average speed of 14.5 miles per hour, and my pedal test was a bit faster with a time of 1 minute and 7 seconds at 16.9 miles per hour. It turns out that the Aventon Level 3 matched up really well with the Pace, which makes sense considering that it has the same motor and battery, although it is a few pounds heavier. My throttle result with the level at Pilot Hill was exactly the same as the pace, and my pedal time came in 1 second faster on the pace, so I think we can comfortably reference the level's results in our standard hill test at Hellhole Trail for a good estimate. The level 3 climbed Hellhole in 2 minutes with its throttle and 1 minute and 23 seconds when pedaling. That throttle time is about 8 seconds slower than average, while the pedal time is about 2 seconds faster, both of which show that Aventon's e-bikes are effective, regardless of whether you prefer to rely only on the motor or add in some leg power for faster climbing. We will put the Pace 4 through our standard process at Hellhole, and we'll update our written review with those details later, so if you want to check that out, you can use the link in the video description, but otherwise the Pace 4 earns another 2 solid thumbs up. I've touched on a few elements of the Pace 4's ride quality in previous sections, but there's a lot that goes into how a bike feels to ride. Let's go back out to the paths to go over some of the main things like sizing and fit, suspension, motor engagement, and a few others, and then I'll meet you back here to go into a bit more detail.
All right, let's talk about ride quality here on the Pace 4, which is, of course, a sort of city cruiser slash commuter hybrid. And as we've discussed, this version of the bike is a little bit different, a little bit sportier feeling with the BMX style handlebars and a little bit of a forward lean to the riding position. So Aventon makes this bike in 2 frame sizes that fit riders from 4'11" up to 6'1", and we are riding the large size frame right now. And I am 5'11", so kind of nearing the top end of the height range for that. But I would say that the sizing makes perfect sense just based on how the bike feels and where I have things set. So there's about 5 inches of adjustment in your saddle height with the suspension seat post. And then there's a threadless standard style stem up front with the BMX style bars that allow you to kind of loosen up the stem and then change the angle of the handlebars to affect the reach and the riding position a bit. So I don't know if you can tell from the angle of the camera that we actually have our handlebars here angled back just to kind of encourage that upright riding position. And I've got great leg extension. The reach is a little bit on the longer side on this bike, so as you can see, my arms are fairly outstretched in front of me here, but overall I'd say that it does feel very comfortable, as long as you are comfortable with that sort of sportier riding position. But let's see, we have a rigid fork up front. There's no suspension on the front end, but again, with the upright positioning, I think the suspension seat post was a good choice. Definitely keeps the ride feeling smooth, and I don't mind a little bit of vibrations in my hands and wrists here. I think if you keep a little bit of a bend at your elbow, you can kind of use your arms as a suspension there. But the bike rolls on 27.5 by 2.1 inch street tires, so kind of optimized for rolling efficiency here. You do get a little cushion from those. They're wide enough to soak up a little bit of bumps, especially if you ride with lower air pressure. And decent stability as well. Good traction here on paved surfaces, which, as a city cruiser is kind of where this bike is intended to ride. So lastly, we've got the 500 watt rear hub motor that is of course paired with a torque sensor that, super responsive feel, very natural on the low end, and honestly pretty powerful on the high end, kind of as we've talked about in the speed test section. Now, I do want to kind of kick up the power level here and discuss a little bit of the additional features on this bike. We'll go through the app in more detail, but as you can see, I've got the Aventon app pulled up and we're doing some ride data tracking here. So I've kind of been going up and down this path as we've been filming, and it's keeping track of my ride time, my speed. It has an estimated range there, which is really nice, as well as my average speed, that sort of thing. So you can manually track your rides, but because of the GPS unit in the bike, it will track your rides automatically, which is very cool, and we'll take a look at how it does show that. But there's also a ton of security features that we're going to go into, and one of them I have set to go off just up the path here. I have the geofencing boundary set up, so we're going to be entering an area that is, a prohibited area. You can choose to set either allowed or prohibited areas, and then if you enter into a prohibited area or exit an allowed area, the pedal assist system deactivates. There's an alarm that goes off, and there we go, right on time. So If I continue riding, I can still pedal the bike just manually with no pedal assist, but that alarm is going off. Just, it's not super loud, but it, probably does get some attention. And then if we get through the prohibited zone, the pedal assist system will kick back on. Okay, got a truck up there, so I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to show you that, but in any case, that's the basics of ride quality. Let's go back to the studio for a sec, and then I'll see you back out here shortly to talk about the app.
I mentioned the bike's 2 frame sizes in that clip. So there's a small medium frame that fits riders from 4'11" up to 5'7", and then the large, extra large frame goes from 5'7" up to the maximum of 6'1". Again, I thought the bike was comfortable, and I do enjoy its sportiness, but I do want to acknowledge that it feels quite a bit different to ride than previous versions of the Pace because of the differences in frame geometry and handlebars. If you have an older model of the Pace that you like, but you're looking to upgrade to get the new security features, you may want to consider swapping out the BMX-style handlebars for a set of Dutch-style cruiser bars, and maybe even look at getting a stem with more rise to get a similar feel. Great handling has always been a major component to the Pace though, and this new bike definitely continues the trend. This bike feels zippy and agile, it corners really crisply because of its rigid fork, and I think it's generally nice and sturdy thanks to the gravity cast frame. One additional strength of this bike is its overall simplicity, at least at face value. The app and many of the security features can definitely add some complexity along with a bit of a learning curve, but you don't have to dive into those things if you don't want to. You can still access the battery and wheel locks through the display, so it's still plenty secure if you opt not to use the app. And the Pace has a pretty straightforward user interface, and the overall cockpit layout is nice and clean. That said, the app is really well done, and it opens up tons of features you won't find in many other places. So let's go back out one last time, and I'll walk you through everything it has to offer.
All right, so let's go ahead and walk you guys through the Aventon app in detail here. So my phone seems to be getting a little bit warm. It got a little dim. Hopefully you guys can see everything okay. But in any case, I'm on the landing screen here. So we've got an image of the bike. We've got the bike's name and then a little Bluetooth icon to let you know that you are actually paired with the bike there. There's also some basic ride data here and functionality that you can access. So it shows we're right up to about 10 hours of ride time, which is pretty impressive with all of our range testing and whatnot. We've got an odometer reading there, and you can turn the bike on and off directly. You can lock and unlock the rear wheel and turn on and off the light system. So let's go ahead and actually lock the wheel so you can hear that. All right, so now if I try to roll the bike forward, that pin will engage, and I can't actually move the bike without dragging it, but I can unlock it, and then we are free to go. Cool. So there's a more settings button here that we'll talk about a little bit later on, but let's kind of run through the rest of the main stuff here. So you've got a battery charge percentage. If you go in there, this will also keep track of the health of your battery, so you can know after a certain number of charge cycles when it's time to replace way down the road. There's also the battery lock function, so you can eject the battery from the underside of the down tube there. And of course you can do that through the bike's display as well. You can change the pedal assist setting here just by hitting the up and down buttons. That corresponds to the display as well. And then if you actually tap on the name of the pedal assist setting, you can go in and see the ride tune feature that we've talked about a little bit. So you can see there are some sliders, and there's this little diagram that shows you basically the balance between the functions that those sliders are attributed to. And those will change depending on what pedal assist setting you select. And basically those three functions are torque, assistance, which is sort of your motor's peak wattage, and then the pedal response, which is essentially the sensitivity of the torque sensor there. And you can see that that diagram changes. So if you adjust those things, then you can save your settings and apply them to the bike. But if for some reason you want to go back to the factory settings, just hit that top right factory reset button and it will reset your levels there. So we've also got a map with the GPS function, thanks to the ACU's 4G chip there. You can see where we are, and that's actually got a little name as well, which is cool. Again, another summary of some ride data: your max speed, average speed, total calories burned, and total CO2 reduced. You can use this function here to locate dealers in your area, Aventon dealers, so you can get your bike serviced. You can see that there were a ton on the map there. You have a diagnostics function that for some reason isn't working right now for us. I've been able to run through that on other Aventon bikes that have the ACU, and it's basically like a series of tests that check the electrical systems just to make sure everything's functioning right. So there was a firmware update that I opted not to do earlier, and that might have something to do with that, but in any case, you can also reach out to Aventon for support there if you need to. Now, if we go over to, well, actually, on the bottom of the phone here, there are 5 buttons that are different panels within the app. So if we go to the next one, which is called Record, this shows basically a summary of ride data that you can track manually, as you saw in the ride quality section earlier, and that's shown with the blue bar. But there's also these gray bars, and that's data that has been tracked just automatically since there's the 4G connectivity with GPS functionality. The system will keep track of that, but you can also do it manually by hitting the go button, as we saw earlier. And then, of course, you've got those summaries of ride data there as well. You can also see, how you've done just for the day, for the month, for the year, and all time. Now, if we keep going over here to the Discover panel, this is sort of Aventon's own little social media sort of feature here where you can see rides, photos, posts from other Aventon e-bike users, and you can make friends there definitely if you want. And then all the way on the right, there's a Me panel that is basically like your personal profile. So, that has some awards just depending on how often you ride your bike. You can earn those. And then there's a few things that are shared between this panel and some of the other panels that we've looked at. So there's the diagnostics function. You can, pair and unpair with the bike through here. You can find your dealer network, that sort of thing. But also you can connect this app with Strava and Apple Health. So after I tracked that ride earlier, I opened up Strava and the data was right there. I was able to save that ride. So it syncs both, with the Aventon app and then with these external apps as well. But then if we go back to that main screen and we go into the More Settings panel, this is where, the primary ACU related features are accessed. So you can change the screen brightness there. You have the auto power off function that if you turn that on, you can set the bike to power off anywhere between 1 and 99 minutes after you leave it. You can, again, here adjust the pedal assist setting and access the ride tune feature to change your motor output. You have a speed limit and metric that allows you to change the bike's top speed. So, it will ship with the 20 mile per hour speed limit, and you can go down without a hitch. But if you go up, there is a little thing you have to agree to here that basically just says, hey, I'm allowed to do this wherever I live. And then you can switch your units from imperial to metric. You also have the alarm system that you can turn on and off. You can have the bike set to automatically lock the rear wheel when it's powered off. And then, of course, if you do that, you can unlock it just with that home screen in the app. So that's very quick and easy. You have security verification. So basically, this is, actually, let's touch back here. So if we go back, there's a thing down here called IoT service. So this is the subscription service related to the ACU and the 4G connectivity. Basically allows you to, remotely lock and deactivate the bike in the event of theft. There's like a $20 annual fee or $2 monthly fee. So if you agree to that and you go back to the security verification, you can basically set this up so that if your bike doesn't turn on and connect to Aventon's servers within a certain amount of time, which you can choose that, then it will automatically deactivate the bike. And then you've got the lost mode here, which again, if your bike gets stolen, you can deactivate it remotely. Continuing, we've got unusual activity detection. So that's basically if you leave your bike and you lock the rear wheel and just let it sit there. If it gets jostled around, it'll send you notifications saying, hey, your bike is moving. There's 3 sensitivity levels that we've found that the mid-level works just fine. We had it on the high at one point in time back when we did the Abound SR, and it was a little bit too sensitive, but I don't know if they've updated that since then. But in any case, you can clear the bike's password and set up a new one. You have geofencing boundaries that we looked at earlier. So you have both restricted and allowed areas, and you can set up a few of those. You can choose to activate or deactivate those. There we go, edit. And then you can see that whenever you're setting those, you have different shapes you can choose from. You can move those around on the map using the center pin, and then you can adjust the size of the boundary just by sort of dragging that around, and then you can save it. So earlier, as you saw, we entered the prohibited zone, which deactivated the pedal assist system and activated the alarm. I'm gonna actually deactivate those so that doesn't happen to me. And then the reverse happens if you're in an allowed zone where, if you're, so yeah, I activated that because I'm outside of the zone. But if you take the bike out of that zone, then the alarm will activate until you go back in. So that's, great if you have kids that you want to let them borrow the bike, but just to stick in the neighborhood, something like that. So you've got firmware updates here. You can back up and restore all of your settings. Again, that IoT service that we talked about with the subscription fee. And then there's also a transport mode that's very cool. So it's basically like a power saving function. If you're transporting the bike and you want to prevent the ACU from draining battery power as much, you can activate this. I'm not going to do that because it will shut down the bike, but that's basically it. You can also unpair here, but that covers all the meat and potatoes of the app here. Let's go ahead and bounce back to the studio and wrap up the review.
If I had to summarize the Pace 4 with only a few words, I'd say it's comfortable, responsive, sporty, secure, and packed full of value. The security features that come with the ACU are things we've seen in a handful of other places, but they're usually accompanied by a price tag that's at least double what this bike costs, and sometimes much more than that. Performance-wise, the Pace did a fantastic job with excellent range, great stopping power, solid hill climbing ability, and an intuitive, customizable, and really dialed-in pedal assist system. The Pace 4 is just one more notch at Aventon's belt, which just goes to show that the company is putting its experience to good use. I'll admit that this bike was a bit different than I expected based on my experience with previous versions of the Pace, and overall I think it went in the right direction, but it does have a couple of areas with room for improvement, or at least things buyers should be aware of ahead of time. If you're coming off the Pace 500.2 or 500.3 and you're expecting the same feel, you may need to make some changes to get a bit closer to that. And while I'm happy to see the Pace 4's integrated turn signals, I hope Aventon brings back the brake light functionality in the future. Those things aside, I think you'll definitely appreciate what this bike has to offer if you want something that rides like a regular bike with less effort required. If you're considering Aventon's Level 3, but you're concerned it might be a bit too aggressive, this bike will likely be a better option for you. And if you're looking for a leisure bike or a lighter long-range commuter, the Pace 4 should also fit that bill. If you want to take a closer look, the two links in the video description will take you either to Aventon's website or our written review at electricbikereport.com. We appreciate your support when you use our affiliate link to make a purchase. And if you enjoyed this review, please consider giving this video a like. Let us know your thoughts down in the comments section. Make sure you're subscribed so I can see you in the next one. But thanks for taking a ride with me today. Again, I'm John with Electric Bike Report, and this is the Aventon Pace 4.